So in this video, I want to show you how to make the perfect lemon tart. And first, I want to show you how to blind bake. So making now a short crust pastry, which means you just mix in some flour, some sugar, some butter and some eggs and a little bit of water. Now the art of that is of course not to develop the gluten too much, because if you develop the gluten too much, your pastry will be a little bit hard later on. So the art of that is you just literally mix all the ingredients together until they're smooth and until you find there's no lumps left, but I'll show you that in a second. So the great thing about the pastry is also, if you always like to make a bit more, and if you have any leftovers, you can freeze it down, you can use it again and again. And I will show you several tricks during that video where you can really sort of perfect that art of blind baking, rolling it even, and then of course make the absolute perfect lemon tart. That recipe you have here today is a recipe that I first saw at the Waterside Inn, which is a Michelin star restaurant which I used to work in, and then obviously at Pierre, where I used to work too as a head chef, and that lemon tart was a standard on that menu. And it is a classic French dessert, but you find it all around the world. And now let's check the pastry. Can you see there's no lumps inside, there's no linings of flour or eggs or butter, and that's what you're working towards. So it needs to be a really, really smooth dough. After that, you can freeze the dough down, you can store it in the fridge for, at least a week, freeze it down, any leftovers, and you can roll it out again and again. So the next thing I want to show you here is I'm going to make a higher lemon tart today, but you can just use another mold, which I'll show you in a second too. But I just fold the paper around, and that's what sort of pastry chefs use, pastry shops use, and those stainless steel rings are really good because they don't bend. If you don't have a round bottom like I have, you just put it straight onto a baking tray, and they're really hygienic. And the great thing is, because of the metal doesn't oxidize, so it doesn't give you a strong flavor like you sometimes could use a fluted tin like this one. But if you do use a fluted tin like this one, what you need to do, you need to make sure that you over grease the ears of that fluted tin, simply because, if you just miss one or two spots in there and you don't have any butter in there, the problem you will then have is that it's going to stick. And if it sticks and you try to pull a lemon tart out, the whole thing just falls apart. Don't worry about greasing the bottom, because you can slide it off that easily anyway. The amount of fat obviously helps you enormously with frying that pastry as well. So it browns up nicer and it's going to be more crunchy. Just make sure that you put a tray underneath, because a little bit of the butter will drip out and you don't want to have that on the bottom of your oven. So what I do here now is an absolutely amazing trick. I cut my short crust pastry up and cut it already approximately into the thickness I wanted to have it to be at the end. So, meaning by that, I don't have to roll too much. It's really hard. If you take a big lump of pastry and you try to roll it out really evenly, that can be really, really difficult if you're not trained. And what you end up with is it's really thin on the sides and it's really thick in the middle. So by cutting it in that way, you obviously determine already how thick the pastry is going to be, and then we're just going to join up the edges and the ends. And then you put another piece of paper on it, because it's a short crust pastry, so you never develop the gluten. So the one thing you obviously have, it's very crumbly. It's not like a pasta dough, a pie dough, a bread dough, where you do develop the gluten, and through that it's so stretchy and you can lift it up and you roll it up in, on a bench with flour. But if you don't have the gluten development, this will be very crumbly. So hence it's best you roll it out between paper. The other advantage is obviously I don't add any more flour to it, and I can use it again and again. And the other good thing is, now when I lift it up, it's obviously I use the second sheet of paper as a skin, and I can easily lift it into the mold, as you see here. So today I show you the worst case scenario. I leave the pastry really, really wet, and if it's too wet and the paper doesn't peel off, you just take the whole thing, put it in the fridge or put it in the freezer for 5 or 10 minutes. Because of the sheer amount of butter, the butter will harden up, the pastry goes hard, and it peels off really, really easily. The same when you make the pastry in the beginning, you might find it a bit too soft, but that's not because there's not enough flour in it, that is because the butter is really soft. So then carefully fold it into the corners without later having to push it in, and then try to peel the paper off. You can see here what I do is my pastry is really wet, but I want to show in this video how it's really done. I not just want to make myself look good and then you come across that problem. So what I do, I just push it back in. I try to make it stick to the mold. Eventually I get all the paper out, and then I just go through it, and then I'm just gonna fill out all the gaps. You can see it's really sticky, so I would be better off putting that whole thing in the fridge for around 10 minutes, and it would peel much easier. Then you see it right here. And now it's just, if you have the situation like I have now, because you sometimes do rush a bit when you bake things at home, don't you? It's just now fill up all the holes, because the custard, what you're gonna have in there is really liquid. So if there's any hole in there, it's gonna run through. As well as I want to make sure that the pastry is really, really even in the corners, so it looks really good later on, and it's not sort of thick on some spots. So the next thing I need to show you is the pastry. So you do not cut the pastry off on the top, you cut the pastry off just a little bit overlapping, because you need to think, once you put it in the oven, you know the pastry is going to get hot right on the top first, and if it doesn't have anything to hold on, just cut the pastry off right on top of the ring like so many people do, you will find that the pastry will slide down, and then you lose quite a few millimeters. Plus, if you build it up nicely on the sides, you will also find that you get an extra 2 or 3 millimeters of pastry, which is absolutely perfect later on, because you can fill your tart a bit higher, which makes the trimming of the edges much easier, makes it look much neater. So when do you blind bake and when you don't blind bake? You blind bake when you have a filling that needs a lower cooking temperature than the pastry. So the pastry, like the lemon tart, later on we're going to cook it at 120 degrees or so. You will find that basically your pastry will not cook at that temperature. So you need to cook the pastry separate, and then I cook the custard at the lower temperature. So what you see me doing here now is just basically taking a piece of paper. I did sort of fold it together, and then I pulled it off at the end, so it's nice and round. You don't have to do that, but the next thing is now that when you put that paper in there, you need to make sure that you don't have too many air bubbles in it, and you fold it nicely over the edges, and that's called blind baking. You have to fold it over the edges, otherwise you might have a bit of movement of the pastry during baking right on the top there. Then you fill in some baking beads, just get some rice, beans, like I have a mixture here, I have rice, beans, pasta, and you can use that for years and years. You just store it away, and you need to fill it right to the top. So next you bake it in the oven, and it should be approximately 160 degrees or above. Could be up to 200 degrees. And you bake it for approximately 20 to 30 minutes until you see that the pastry on the top of the edge gets a little bit brown. Now, when you find that your pastry is ready, you lower the temperature in the oven, and that's very important because you want to obviously cook the custard at a different temperature. So while the temperature in the oven drops, you take out the beans or the baking goods, and then you place that casing back into the oven, because you might find sometimes on the bottom there it still needs a bit more drying out. There might be, the dough might be still a bit steamy, still a bit wet, because the moisture couldn't escape. So take the paper out, and you can see it's nice and brown on the top. It has a perfect color right on the top, but in the middle it's still a bit sort of doesn't have much color, and that's what you call blind baking. So the next thing is very important. You need to fill up all the gaps. If you find there's anywhere gap, or like what I do here, I build the edges back up again, then your lemon custard will later on ooze out, and the whole thing is basically a disaster. I mean, you can learn much more about how blind baking in all my online courses if you check out my website. So I wouldn't have to do that, for example, if I make a chocolate tart, or if I make a raspberry tart and things like that, or berry tart, because I don't have to bake it again. But if I make a quiche, if I make a lemon tart, it's extremely important to do that. So now you place it back into the oven while the temperature still lowers, and you don't cook it for longer than 10 or 15 minutes. If you cook it for too long, you might find that the pastry dries out too much, and you get lots and lots of cracks all over the place. And so you basically blind bake your pastry now. So the next thing you're going to do is make the lemon custard. So first, get some lemons, and they need to be super ripe. Ideally use organic lemons, because they don't have all that chemicals and the flowing agents which they use to make the wax liquid that they spray on it, highly toxic chemicals. So stay away from them. So take those lemons and peel them, and you need to zest them really, really fine, because you will obviously leave those zests in the lemon tart. The other part is very important, that you don't use any of the white pith. If you're going to get too much of that white pith in there, which is literally just right under the yellow skin, the lemon tart might become very, very bitter. So you just take the first layer of the skin off, then you cut the lemons in half, and then you choose them. Now, I gave you a recipe there, but sometimes you might find that your lemons don't release that much juice, so you might have to use another extra 2 or 3 lemons just to have enough sourness. The best thing is, the best indicator is to taste it. If you're happy with the sourness of the liquid you're just creating here, or the uncooked custard, then that's how your lemon tart's going to taste at the end. But you find sometimes it's hard to get any juice out of lemons. And then, your custard is just not that sour enough. Now, that version I showed today is a cooked custard. There's obviously lots and lots of different versions around, where you cook the custard first and then you fill it into the casing, or you cook the custard in the casing, like I do today, or in the pastry. But again, you can learn it all on my online courses. Please check them out, and also subscribe to my channel if you like the video, or leave me a comment. And now choose all the lemons, mix them together with the lemon zest, and it works really nicely with lime as well. Then you add sugar to it, and you need to mix that together, and then you will add eggs to it, and it's a lot of eggs, it's whole eggs, yeah. So you mix that together. The cream is absolutely the last thing that has to go in, plus the eggs have to go afterwards as well. Sugar as well could cook your egg yolks. So first the lemon zest, then the lemon juice, then the sugar. You mix that together, then you add the eggs, and then you add the cream. If I would add the cream too early before the eggs, the acidity of the lemon might split the cream. So regards cream, you can just use single cream, you can use pouring cream. Do you want it a bit richer? Use double cream. I use thickened cream today. So thickened cream is literally just single cream with a little bit of gelatin or alginates in it. And that makes it a bit lighter. But if you want a richer, sort of a really bit of a creamier taste, then you use double cream. So you mix that together now. And now I want to show you an absolutely amazing trick. And if you've watched my other videos, or if you're on my online courses, you probably saw the trick a few times before. I will warm the custard. So why would I warm the custard? Now that's a trick not a lot of people ever tell you, because if I put the custard in cold, I'm going to have 2 problems. It's going to be a very long cooking time, which will soften the pastry. I want that shortbread to be really snappy and really dry. So I don't want to expose it to a liquid for too long. The second thing is, a lot of people I heard over the years tell me that they get cracks in the middle of the lemon tart. And that's just because you simply cook it too long. And then eventually it does cook, and the custard dries in the middle out as well, and it cracks. So what I do, how hot do I warm it up? I warm it up to sort of approximately 50 degrees. So just think about as hot your shower is, or just go somewhere around the 50 degrees. You don't want to go close to 70. Somewhere with 50, 55, 60 degrees is pretty good. So you warm the custard up. You constantly stir it with a flat spatula so it doesn't stick to the bottom and the eggs don't curdle. So now I fill my warm custard into the pastry, and I don't remove the pastry because I don't want to juggle that around. If I fill that up right to the top, as you see here, if I try to juggle that tray from the kitchen bench into the oven, I'm most likely gonna have some spillage, and that will then go between pastry and the custard and the tray, and then your shortbread crust will not be nice and dry anymore. So now I took a jug and I just filled in the rest, put it in the oven. I lowered the temperature to sort of 120, 130 degrees, and I cook it, and after 20 minutes I check it, and you can see it starts immediately setting on the outside, and that's because I warmed the egg. So the cooking time of that lemon tart might be literally just 15, 20, 25 minutes, depending on how warm you heated your custard. But again, don't overheat it, you don't want it to curdle. But all I do with the heating, I cut the cooking time down to literally a quarter of the original time. So then take it out, let it stand for at least 20 or 30 minutes. because that's the time it needs to sort of set for the custard to set. And the best lemon tart is obviously where the custard is sort of at a warm room temperature. Now, when I used to work in the Wood Sardine or as well at Marcus, we used to bake that tart twice during lunch and 3 times during dinner. So the reason for that is that the short crust pastry is always at its best and quite crunchy, and that the custard is still a bit warm. So you can see me now taking off the top with a serrated knife, and you try to cut outwards so that you don't get any crumbles onto the custard. Then I pull off the paper. If you use a spring mold, you know what to do. You just unlock it, and then I slide the tart gently onto a serving tray. And that's the great thing with those rings, that's why pastry chefs use them, because I can get it perfectly onto a plate right in the middle without a mess. So when I serve it then, and I have it out of the oven now approximately 40 minutes or so, I run my knife around and I lift it off, and here's a lemon tart. And that's pretty good as it is, and you could put some sugar on it, you can caramelize it like you could see in my creme brulee videos. But what I'm going to do today, I'm going to do my favorite version, because once I cooked that tart for the Queen of England, and that's what I did. I put lots and lots of raspberries on it, and you can serve the raspberries on the side, but it just goes so nicely with the acidity of that lemon tart. And then I put some candied lemon zest on the top, and those candied lemon zests you can learn in my online course. They're really easy to do. And lemon zest on the top. I finish it off with a few mint leaves. You could of course do some edible flowers as well. Just make sure you don't put too much weight on the top of the lemon tart, because the custard is very soft and you don't want it to sort of break, or if there's too much weight on it, you're gonna cut it and the whole thing just mushes up. Not that it's a bad thing, but it just doesn't look that pretty, but it still tastes amazing. So here you go, there's your lemon tart. So I hope you enjoyed that video. Please subscribe, check out my online cooking school, and check out my other videos. And I look forward seeing you at one of my next videos, and I hope you enjoy that.